Good evening. I am Isha Mishra, Assistant Professor, Department of Psychology. A warm welcome by the Jesus and Mary College, IQAC, in collaboration with the Department of Psychology. Today's interactive webinar, titled In a Relationship with the Screen, is an attempt to understand the changing dynamics of the youth currently exclusively focused on smartphones or laptops for all activities during the pandemic. We are hoping to explore, in conversation with our esteemed speaker, the psychological and relational changes that this has brought about. Surely the discussion will resonate with what each of us of the older age group is also facing today. At the outset, we would like to welcome Sister Dr. Rosalie, Principal Jesus and Mary College, our speaker, Professor Aseem Shrivastava, Professor at Ashoka University, faculty and staff of JNC, our students, and our guest participants. Before we begin, I invite Sister Rosalie to lead us in prayer, invoking God's blessings on us and to provide a start to the webinar of today. Sister?
A very good afternoon. Respected Professor Aseem Shrivastava, speaker for today's event, faculty members, and my dear students, and all the participants, I'm very happy to welcome you all to this special webinar organized by the Department of Psychology, Jesus and Mary College. The topic for today's discussion, as already explained, is in a relationship with the screen. We are privileged to have with us Professor Aseem Shrivastava. Thank you so much, sir, for accepting our invitation to speak on this important topic. I am sure not only our students, but also all of us will gain insight into using the technology. The time has come that we can no longer ignore the use of technology. It has become part of our daily life. The social media that give means of communication, especially during this pandemic. It is important that we use the technology carefully, wisely, and judiciously so that we do not fall into the trap or into the evil effect of using the technology and social media, ignoring the negative effect on our physical and mental health, as well as the emotional impact on our family life. Let us make our life and our earth a beautiful place for ourselves and for others. Before we begin this webinar, let us invoke God's blessings on each one of us and on the whole world. Almighty God, we bring before you our students. We thank you for each one of them, their aspirations, hopes, along with the challenges, anxieties, and fears. Bless each one of them, Lord. Heal them. Fill them with your love, courage, and confidence. We also pray for all those who are affected by the COVID-19 virus. We pray for the doctors, nurses who look after us. We also pray for all those who are unemployed during this pandemic. Help us, Lord, to cope with every situation, especially this COVID-19 pandemic. fill us with courage and hope so that we live a healthy and happy, peaceful life. Amen. On this occasion, I also congratulate Dr. John Anthony and all the faculty members of the Department of Psychology for taking all the trouble for making this webinar a reality. I thank the entire webinar team and all those who contributed to make this webinar a grand success. Thank you and God bless you all.
Thank you, sister. An announcement, except for psychology faculty of GMC, we request everyone else to keep their mics on mute and videos off. All the participants, please put your mics on mute and videos off. If you have any questions for our speaker, kindly write them in the chat box. They will be addressed later in the session as much as the time allows. Thank you so much. May I now request our moderator for the session, Ms. Annie Bakshi, Assistant Professor in the Department of Psychology, to introduce Professor Shrivastava and commence the conversation.
Annie, I think your video is muted.
I'm sorry. Just a second. Am I audible now?
Yes, you are.
Thank you, Isha. Good afternoon, everyone. It gives me immense pleasure to introduce our speaker, Professor Aseem Shrivastava. Currently working at Ashoka University, Dr. Shrivastava teaches the course Global Ecosophy in the Young India Fellowship Program. Over the last few years, he has been researching, writing, and lecturing extensively on issues associated with globalization and its multiple ecological and other impacts. Bridging the gap between theory and practice, he has recently initiated a movement which he has named Prakriti Dhara. It has brought together a group of like-minded individuals to explore alternatives that are both sustainable and respectful of the cultural and ecological heritage of our country. On a more personal note, he has chosen not to own a smartphone and uses what we popularly call dabba phone. The rhetorical justification of the gadget as means to stay connected has been repeatedly questioned by him through his words and actions. Now, under lockdown, with time freed by the absence of what he calls match phone box, he spends time listening to baul music. His life provokes us to re-examine our relationships with our gadgets and ourselves. I now invite Professor Shrivastava to share his perspective on our topic for today in a relationship with the screen. We welcome you, sir.
Thank you, Annie, and thank you to all the organizers at Jesus and Mary College. Is this volume level appropriate? Do I need to speak louder or softer? Okay, good, thank you. I've given my own title in my own language for the talk, and I've called it Screens Are Us. So it's a sort of a plagiarism if you can make the connection to Toys Are Us, Kids Are Us, Screens Are Us. Screens are our toys as against or as different from toys of our children. I would like to begin by actually building two metaphors, one of which is my own, and the other is a metaphor from ancient Greece. So the first story goes like this. There is, think of the Himalayas and think of a very idyllic village somewhere in Kashmir long before the conflict begins there, or in Himachal Pradesh, somewhere in Kangda Valley or something. And you have in this village long ago, in a very calm and beautiful valley, you have a cherry orchard. And the entire village is sort of built around the cherry orchard. There is no money here. There's not much interaction with the outside world except the contiguous villages and region in the Himalayas. And imagine now that there is more than adequate food for everybody. They're growing enough. There's fruit to be plucked off the trees and so on. You have very frequent celebrations, and the typical celebration is like this. You sort of sit around an oval table, and people tell stories and jokes and share memories and hopes and so on, dreams. And of course, the occasional drink of locally made wine and so on. So much conviviality and a very nice, comfortable atmosphere, right? And then somebody gets the idea that they want to have their own party, right? And then that person throws a party at which that person wants to invite even more people than were invited to the other party, right? And very soon you notice there's a sort of a competitive atmosphere that builds up in the village, and everybody wants to have their own party, and ever more people are invited. And then soon after that, you notice that people start hoarding these cherries and start storing them in boxes. And even if they start going bad, they still want to hoard them and so on. At some point, at one of these parties, and time has moved on, let's imagine that some years have gone by. At one of these parties, the table begins to sort of shrink and vanish. At some point, just as when the table is about to vanish, people start panicking because the thing that brought them together, that held the community together, is no longer there. And so they start flailing about and looking for the table. And at some point, they are sitting with their backs turned to each other, right? And just at that point, there's a small table which appears in front of each of them. And there's an object lying on that table. And it opens, and there's a screen. And the screen says, Facebook. So they get very excited because the first thing they realize is that they can make contact with all their old friends again. But what's even more exciting is that now they can make contact with friends in Delhi and Bombay and far off places and continents they haven't heard of and so on. And before they know it, they have something like 5,000 friends, right? And at some point, somebody gets unwell, falls ill, and they look for somebody to sort of help them, take care of them. And everybody says they're very busy, right? So you get the point. This is a sort of parable I've created to sort of indicate what has happened over the last no less than 500 years. Because what's really been going on in the world for these 5 centuries is the increasing rise of the market as a way of organizing human society itself. And today you have a society virtually everywhere on the planet which is subjugated to the rhythms of the marketplace. So the market, which was once embedded in human culture and ecology, has now become disembedded, and society and ecology are in turn embedded in the marketplace, in the economy. So it's the economy which is regulating society now, and it's the economy which tries to control ecology, but ecology and society both frequently get out of hand, thank God. So what you have is here a parable which sort of tries to show how, in order to sell the fake version of something, you first need to destroy the real, or obscure the real at least. And only then will people buy the fake. So you get together with people on the screen, typically when not that many opportunities exist for meeting them face to face, such as now, right, in Corona times. So that's one metaphor which I want you to keep in mind throughout this talk. The other metaphor many of you would be familiar with It's the old Greek story of the inn. There is an inn in ancient Greece somewhere, and the thing with this inn is that every single bed in this inn is of a given small size. If they get guests who have longer feet than that, or longer legs than that, then those legs are brought into size as far as the bed is concerned. In other words, they're chopped off, right? So it's what is called the Procrustean bed, right? The bed of Procrustes, the owner of the inn or whatever. And what it means is that, if you want to apply it to technological times, then human beings, the natural world, every animal, every tree, must somehow fit into forms and shapes that suit our technology, right? It must be rendered physically manipulable by the sort of machinery which constitutes the edifice of our technology. Otherwise, it's not much use. We say it's a waste or it's irrelevant and it should be removed. So our whole sort of cognitive apparatus, as it were, is then shaped by the technology which we are supposed to be using to dispose of resources. So nature has been converted into matter, and matter into resources, and resources into objects of utility, and so on. Now, before we speak about the relationship we have with screens, or the relationship our children have with screens, or young people have with screens, it's important to look at what is so attractive about this. In other words, what I'm going to do now for the next few minutes is put down what in ancient, philosophical argument used to be called the Purva Paksha, right? So what is your rival's strongest suit, right? What is their best argument? And here's the thing, the internet, which is what we are fundamentally talking about, has become as indispensable as electricity, which as a prerequisite to the internet yet remains even more indispensable. And which means, just as a small, invisible footnote to that, that the energy sources which you need to drive the system of electrical power in the country or the world, that is even more indispensable, right? So that's now the journey from inevitability, from telephones and telegraph to railways, automobiles, aeroplanes, etc. The internet is to the 21st century what electricity was to the, shall we say, early 20th century or mid 20th century. Indispensable for life for so-called civilized parts of the world. In fact, it is much more than electricity. It's not just a technology, but in so many ways, a way of being, a way of life, right? Electricity did not define human identity in the manner and degree to which one's presence on the web does, right? You could not measure yourself with air conditioners and refrigerators in quite the same manner in which social media likes and Google hits inform you of your own self-worth. So something has changed rather profoundly in the nature of technology which we are using. So when people say, rather innocently sometimes, that it's just a tool, it all depends on how you use it, well, there are tools and there are tools. And this is a bit more like a tool that can command you or certainly insinuate and prompt you so much that you get fed up with it and ultimately you follow suit, which is to say you get so many dialog boxes in which you better say yes or you can't proceed. And that they call choice. So it's very much a situation of an automated series of cascading choices. Despite power cuts and outages, electricity does not unfriend you in the manner that Facebook can and does on a frequent basis, right? So it can hurt you, as we know, and several vulnerable people have actually made, inadvertent or conscious sacrifices to this technology. The other, of course, big advantage and the sort of attraction of the internet is its enormous convenience. And just like with every other technology, it fills a gap often created by itself. And I'll come to that in a minute. Even this lockdown would be unimaginable in the absence of the internet. The people for whom the lockdown has been created, either in India or in any other part of the world, are people who are digitally mobile, shall we say, if not digitally agile, right? The people who are locked out or locked up, as the case may be, they're not so digitally mobile or agile. They live across the digital divide, right? How would powerful global elites receive their supplies without Amazon or Swiggy or Zomato, right? No technology, and this is important, no technology ever lasts unless it answers real problems in real situations in which human beings find themselves. The car, the aeroplane, the telephone, the computer, the laptop, the smartphone have not merely substituted older ways of doing things, but have all added value. I'm using business speak here, have all added value to human life through the creation of what one philosopher has called trans nature, right? Now that's the medium in which human life is lived now, at least in the affluent, privileged parts of the world, both within and across countries. People like us, they live in trans nature. There are people who live in nature and there are people who live in trans nature. We are certainly not the people who live in nature by and large. Smartphones may be culturally and ecologically radioactive, shall we say. I'm going to let that description stand without explanation for the time being. They may be culturally and ecologically radioactive, leading to a rise in various diseases and in the rapid falls in bird populations, for instance. But they also enable people to be in touch at vast distances, to make friends in all sorts of distant, unknown, mysterious, attractive places. Smartphones enable a daughter in distress to call her parents at home. You can have Google Earth and Google Sky at your command, the stars at your fingertips. When was this ever possible, right? The enormous, enormous attraction of it is absolutely undeniable. I mean, nobody can really question this, can they? So this is important to first put down on the table. I think that the attraction of this technology is formidable, and it's like no other technology previously created, as far as I can tell. So it's no surprise that we've come to live, especially in Corona times, in a world of what I call digital gravity. Digital gravity has a strange property of also being digital levity, which is to say the same thing which is attracting you downwards, it's also pulling you upwards. It's giving you a sense of flight. It's giving you a sense of, shall we say, freedom, even if it's actually escape, but we experience it very often as freedom. Digital companies are committed to the growth of the work from home market for their products in Corona times. Just look at Zoom and Google, for instance, what we are using right now. Also, please look at the rise of child pornography when the lockdown begins on March 25th. And if newspaper reports are accurate, then the jump is as much as 95% in 24 hours. Did you find the RSS complaining very much about this? Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao doesn't include this clearly. Just as they did not complain very much when liquor stores were being raided in the first week of May when the lockdown was briefly suspended. Now, the rise in the revenues of digital corporations during this Corona pause, is this a coincidence? Is this just a market opportunity which they cashed in on? Or perhaps there's more method in the madness, yeah? And if you look at, for instance, the fortunes of somebody like Jeff Bezos, the owner of Amazon, he's grown richer by, I'm told, over $30 billion in the last 3 months. Can a man be that productive no matter what he does? he's expected to become a trillionaire by 2025. I'm assuming they're bargaining for a very long era of lockdowns, right? There's a story which I sometimes share with my students. We don't have time to explore the story in any depth right now. But long and short of it is that the CEO of one of the world's leading digital corporations happened to be a close friend of mine, and he clearly sort of said to him in private conversation, of course, that he wanted to create a gadget which would be so endearing to women that they would hold these things to their hearts and say that this is more precious to them than their husbands and their fathers and so on, right? So what I'm trying to communicate is how much is invested by the imagination of digital marketing people in this world in trying to sort of lay hold of markets which already exist or which can be created and must be created. Hence the billions spent on marketing and advertising around the world. I mean, these corporations are not fools to be spending so much on these things if they didn't have much more to get back from that sort of investment. Once again, I want to reiterate what that Facebook metaphor is supposed to communicate, which is that the question I want us to keep asking is, what is the reality you're obscuring, if not destroying, in order to be sold the illusion that then becomes desirable, right? Karl Polanyi, who some of you might have heard of, a major figure in anthropology in the early 20th century, especially economic anthropology, and did a hell of a lot of pioneering work on the history of markets, wrote an important book called The Great Transformation, published in 1944, a book which I regard more important for our times than Karl Marx's Capital. In The Great Transformation, Polanyi basically makes the point that the expansion of the market, the rate at which it is going, is subjugating society, and if this continues for a bit longer, it'll lead to the very demolition of society. I'm using his words almost verbatim. Now, an element of marketing that you notice in these digital corporations is that version 1.0 is usually free, right? A friend of mine, when I was a student in America 25 years ago, a friend of mine with a mother who was Native American, and he lost his mother very young. His father was Jewish, mother was Native American. And he told me that when his mother was dying, she said two things to him which have left a deep imprint on his mind. The first thing was, beware of the white man, especially when he brings you gifts. So think of the 1.0, right? And the second thing, of course, that she told him was, before the white man commits a crime, he will make a law which will allow him to commit the crime, right? So think of sedition laws and various other laws. There was a law against homosexuality in so many countries. There was an immorality act in South Africa when apartheid was ruling, and so on. Any number of examples you can think like that. So what has happened, and now I'm going to use my language, which is to say, I'm not going to be polite. What has happened in the last generation with the rise of information technology after the fall of the Berlin Wall, especially, is the theft of the very idea of society. Now, Mrs. Thatcher won 3 elections in one of the world's premier democracies, 3 successive elections under the slogan, "There is no such thing as society." Think about that. Think of a small panchayat election in this country. Can you win even a panchayat election on the slogan, "Samaj jaisi koi cheez nahi hoti hai"? Just imagine the difference between cultures and see, how far apart they are, right? Fortunately, we are not a culture yet, at least, where this kind of slogan will wash with the people. They just are not going to be able to swallow this, right? And yet, this is very important. This technology, social media technology in particular, is disturbing precisely for the reason that it holds out the attraction of being able to take the place of real society itself, right? That's the attraction, and that's also the enormous danger, right? So again, the Facebook metaphor, which I began my talk with, keep that in mind. So there's a whole sort of panoply of digital and screen pathologies which result from this sort of screen slavery that we have seen in the era of the rise of social media and WhatsApp and so on. And what it has led to is what I can call, at some stretch, some kind of a self-plagiarism, some sort of a self-plagiarization. And to me, I think I'm quite clear that plagiarizing others is better than impersonating yourself. I'm not sure why I say that, but I think I'm right in believing that. So there's a kind of virtualization of the self, which this technology has promoted. And I'm going to quote to you a longish, about 7 or 8 line passage from Karl Marx's Paris manuscripts. Here's what he says, and he's talking about money here, but you can apply the same thing to social media. Everything which the economist takes from you in life and in humanity, he replaces for you in money and in wealth. And all the things which you cannot do, your money can do. It can eat and drink, go to the dance hall and the theater, it can travel, it can appropriate art, learning, the treasures of the past, political power. All this it can appropriate for you. It can buy all this. Yet, being all this, it wants to do nothing but create itself, by itself. For everything else is, after all, its servant. And when I have the master, I have the servant, and do not need his servant. All passions and all activity must therefore be submerged in avarice. Unquote. So here what Marx is trying to draw attention to is not only the theft of the community and society, but the theft of the self. And this loss of self, as one philosopher once said, is a bit different from losing your house or losing a spouse or something like that. Nobody notices this loss of self. That's the real tragedy. It goes completely unremarked upon because it's not noticed. It's happening in the realm of the invisible. And who notices when something invisible is lost, right? Now we are being told that machine learned data knows us much better than we can know ourselves. It's almost a toffee being held out to us. You don't have to take the trouble to know yourself because these machines, they've gone through gazillion iterations of gazillion people like you. There's nothing that unique about you. Whatever is unique about you also, this machine will be able to tell you, etc. The marketing ambitions of corporations obviously have vast consequences for the human psyche in the digital era, especially since children are the first target of the marketing divisions. My college friend, school and college friend, Jyotsna Kapoor, has a fine book called Coining for Capital, which is all about how children are inveigled and incorporated into marketing networks of global corporations. Now, if you're not a child, then you must be made to behave like a child, which is to say you have to be infantilized. And I don't have to sort of explain that to an audience like yours in the psychology department. But infantilization is necessary to the expansion of not only the digital economy, but to any consumer economy. How do you make a 70-year-old behave like a 7-year-old? Till I went to America, I didn't realize that 70, 75-year-old people also enjoyed ice cream so much because I hadn't seen that much of that in my family or in the places I grew up in India. And here's the real clincher or the real curse in some way, depending on which way you see things, of the internet. We look for ourselves there, right? This loss of self, which is something which the technology encourages, then means that there is a desire to also then regain yourself. And hence the title of my talk, Screens Are Us. You start looking for yourself in some way on the screen, right? Howsoever temporary that self may be, but you still want to see it, right? It's the real charm and seduction of the internet, if you ask me. Now, the unspeakable irony is that exactly what prompts us to search for ourselves on the screen is precisely the loss of the self and community that this kind of technology, this whole family of technologies has, encouraged. Everyone now endures this to a lesser or greater degree because of the prior triumph of digital abstractions in our lives. And the victory of abstractions has rendered us generic rather than leaving us unique. So it has homogenized humanity to a remarkable degree. You can never make any two people exactly the same, but you can make them similar enough to be equally manipulable by abstract technology. So in normal times, which is to say in pre-digital times, we become ourselves in the living presence of a human community. Parents, family, friends, brothers and sisters, community, etc. Now, we, and even more, our children try to become themselves by building a credible virtual profile on the screen, right? Nassim Taleb, this is the author of The Black Swan. Some people might have heard of this book. Nassim Taleb says the only difference between our times and slavery is that slaves knew they were not free. Right? He says, and I quote him directly here, technology can degrade and endanger every aspect of a sucker's life while convincing him that he's becoming more efficient, more productive. As a contrast to all of this, if the Zen master is right, then nothing ever exists. Or if you don't like Zen, you might want to remember that song from the film Guide. This is a 55-year-old film, excuse me for my old-fashioned taste. But if you recall the famous S.D. Burman song, Wahan Kaun Hai Tera? So the line appears in that song, Kehte hain gyani, duniya hai pani, haath kisi ke na aani. Hai na? So what is being said there? The evanescence, the fleetingness of life, and nothing is forever. And there is no such thing as a fixed point or a stationary place. Buddhists have their own version of this, right? So that's why I was mentioning Zen Buddhists, because the way of liberation for Buddhists is typically the realization of the doctrine of the non-self. There is no such thing. The self itself is a fiction. But it's one thing for the individual to realize that for themselves. It's quite another thing for that self to be stolen from you by something exterior to yourself. There's a whole vast universe between these two ways of losing yourself, right? In the former case, you are in complete command, and in the latter case, you are at the mercy of whatever it is that has stolen yourself. Okay, that's how different those two conditions are psychologically. So what is the message of the internet? In some ways, the message of the internet is you and I, us and them, will cease to exist one day, but the internet shall live forever. Right? Tricky, tricky, tricky. Dangerous, but this is the implicit message. Yeah. So in this precise sense, the internet has probably posed to a long surviving humanity, which has been through many a war and an epidemic and floods and cyclones and all manner of disasters humanity has endured over the ages. But this is probably the most rigorous existential test that humanity has faced. Because this existential test is not physical so much as psychological. I'll be building on this a little more a bit later. The internet has brought about at the same time, simply by virtue of the technology of virtuality, it's brought about a rapid decentralization of life. You know, touch, smell, taste, all these don't exist on the internet, right? And yet we are so pulled to it because the audiovisual does. Okay, you can see, you can hear, and your brain is certainly very active, hyperactive in some ways. There's a kind of neurosis which is typically digital, and we are all, to a greater or lesser degree, party to it in some ways. When it comes to relationships, you need not touch, especially not in Corona times, God forbid. This is advanced modern untouchability. I wonder what some of our critics would have to say about that. You're not supposed to touch, smell, taste, even sight and sound are mediated through optic fibers, right? I mean, right now we are talking through, listening through, watching through optic fibers. Who wants to deal with the messiness of real human senses and the surplus unwanted information they provide? You would rather calibrate and fine-tune the information exactly according to your taste. And as the old Simon Garfunkel song had it, till the man hears what he wants to hear and disregards the rest. The famous song, The Boxer, right? So this is what I call, in philosophical language, digital solipsism. So a solipsist, who is a solipsist? A solipsist is somebody who believes that he is the only real thing in existence. He's the real deal. Everybody else is a fake. Everybody else is a figment of his imagination. It's not very difficult for a Delhiite to imagine it. You just have to get out on the street and see how people drive, and everybody is a solipsist over there, right? They are the only people driving on the street. So you eliminate all the noise around you, the social nuisance of, actual relating to people and so on. So if only virtual relationships remain possible, it is wonderful for the GDP, the gross domestic product for an economist, because, then you are going to lose a lot of your real relationships and will want to substitute them with virtual relationships. And you will have, like in Japan, you have a booming relationship market. You can rent a boyfriend, you can rent a mother-in-law, you can rent a security guard, you can rent just about anybody, any kind of person. I exaggerate not, you can verify all this for yourselves by going to Google. Digital information generates suspicion in real life, right? As everyone has been turned into a spy by Eric Schmidt and his supremely efficient Google team, right? Who isn't a spy? Anybody who Googles a name is a spy. Basically, that's what you're doing. You're finding out information on others behind their backs, right? So what surprise is left in a life in which not only do children see images of elephants before they see real elephants, but also one in which you Google someone before you actually meet them for the first time, okay? All surprise, all mystery, all wonder has been captured already by the mainframe drives and the servers at Mountain View in California. Imagine if that goes up in flames, as almost happened once. Decentralization also has entailed a loss of place. Places have turned into abstract, exchangeable spaces, right? Spaces are, abstract things. They are portable. They have a monetary tag. They can be sold. Now, it's important to know what the distinction is between a place and a space. Long back, I read Gabriel Garcia Marquez's novel, 100 Years of Solitude, Cien Años de Soledad. And in that book, Marquez has a very interesting passage. I can't remember who utters it, but this is what is said. For a place to become a place, somebody has to be born there. Somebody has to live and suffer there. Somebody has to love and suffer there. And somebody has to die there. They have to be cremated. They have to be buried. Something has to happen. A whole cycle of life, a whole wheel of life, the wheel of life has to come full circle for a place to become a place. It's almost Einsteinian in the sense that this is space-time you're talking about. You're not just talking about a physical place, you're also talking about the rhythms of time, okay? The seasons, okay? All this is essential for the making of a place. But in the era of seedless grapes and oranges 12 months a year and everything 12 months a year, what seasons are left? You're living in abstract geographies on the screen. Yeah? So that's the sense in which the decentralization I'm speaking about, that decentralization also entails the loss of place. Further, it means the sort of instantaneous evaporation of time and the indefinite occlusion of the eternal. And no matter how efficient or productive anybody is, the work is always going to be ahead now. There's no way anybody can be up with the program as far as their work is concerned. The work is always going to be ahead simply because these machines are so goddamn efficient. Okay? There's not much you can do about that. So there is always going to be a shortage of time now. Till as long as these technologies are in place in the world and improving and so on, there'll always, always, always be a shortage of time. So time has evaporated now. Time is not available to us, and which means leisure is not available to us, and which means the eternal is occluded from us. So those of us who believe from experience or from imagination that there is such a thing as the eternal, that's occluded, right? That's hidden. God no longer exists, even in erstwhile faithful cultures. Google does, right? So Google's place, I mean, God's place has been taken over by Google. Google is the omniscient being now. Google is also the new Brahman, taking the place of the old expert. And there's a good many modern radicals I know who are actually quite fond of this 21st century caste system. They don't much object to the new hierarchies being installed by digital around the world. They almost value the cloud elites for all their sort of progressive ideas on women and so many things. Right. Now, I want to come to talking a little bit about power and what all this means for politics and such like. Technology, like all else, is most powerful when it is invisible and opaque. It then serves the same practical role that magic used to play in pre-modern cultures. The opacity of digital is one of its most attractive features from the point of view of totalitarian dreamers. Whether they're running governments or corporations is irrelevant. Mentally, they're all totalitarians. We are living in times of corporate totalitarianism, which is why I never liked the term neoliberalism, because it's neither new nor liberal from the point of view of those who are under its jackboots. It's only liberal for those who are pushing their programs through the system. Screens also screen off, right? And that's the idea. It's completely intentional. They're not merely remote from what they show you, in keeping with Milan Kundera's warning that life is elsewhere. You remember the title of that book. They also screen us off from the immediate. The neighborhood has changed. Your friends are far off now. They are not your, mohalla, fellows. I mean, when I was growing up in Patna in the 1970s, you knew everybody in the mohalla. Everybody in the mohalla knew you. You played football, cricket, you fought, you played kabaddi. Everything happened together. That neighborhood has died, right? Even in the villages now, you have kids who are experts at PUBG and all sorts of video games you don't want to know, right? You're a stranger in your own home. For your own home is now also a home equity. Yeah, it's an investment. It may turn into a hotel at any point. We actually have come to live in a hotelized civilization. And whether we want to believe it or not, but that's the nature of the beast we are living in. Technology is now given to us in the Modi era, not just as technology, but as politics. Technology is politics today, okay? Digital India, Make in India. I mean, you think of any old slogan from Chappan Chacha, as I like to call him, and you're talking about politics. You're talking about technology, right? In keeping with the Americanism, if you can't beat them, join them, there are those who canvass for digital aspirationalism, that this technology is inherently egalitarian and offers equal abstract chances to everyone, including the most downtrodden. Let's grant them this. What if this was true? Supposing this is true, which it is not, it's very easy to show that, but we're not going to go there. Let's assume for a minute that these claims are true, that digital aspirationalism actually works, that this technology is inherently open source and inherently egalitarian and so on. So what we're really asking is the following question. What if in this hotelized culture, liberty, fraternity, equality was available to everyone? So in other words, each of us has their own hotel suite of whatever, 2 or 3 bedrooms. We all live ideally alone because those are the terms of digital solipsism and freedom, and that's how we understand freedom now. We don't live with others or a significant other or another. We live with ourselves, me, myself, and I. And when we want to fraternize, we can go down to the lobby, we can go down to the swimming pool, the spa, and the gym, go for a walk, call your friend on the next floor and go out with them. It's equal because everybody has equal rights in some ways. So you have liberty, you have fraternity, equality. Anything wrong with that? I don't see anything wrong with it. It's perfectly consistent with the ideals of the French Revolution as were enunciated in 1789 and as followers of Ambedkar would love to sort of see happen all over the world. But what if it comes under a hotelized culture? What would be wrong with it? Nothing really, except there is no community, right? Society in this definition is much like Maggie Thatcher's vision. It isn't a society, in other words. There isn't a community. In other words, any possibility of communion, classically understood, not possible. And as Tocqueville wrote in Democracy in America, each man is a stranger to the fate of all the rest, right? There isn't a sense of a social web. Everything is about friending, unfriending, deleting, etc. Adding, subtracting. So relationships become a matter of social arithmetic rather than something living, something organic, let alone the possibility that something greater than the two individuals is working through. God forbid. But then there is no God, so not a problem. So that's one problem with this vision, that there isn't communion possibilities. And the other one, of course, is that you're divorced from ecology entirely. Nature doesn't exist. Waterfalls, mountains, rivers, oceans, all these are sort of geographical appendages to the economic system of liberty, fraternity, equality. Since time is short, I'm going to skip over a whole bunch of material which I would have spent some time talking about here. I'm going to close by, well, before I close, one more point. There's a large element of coercive consumption increasingly, and I'll only mention Arogya Setu as an instance of that, okay? So we live in a regime of compulsory consumption now. You will be lent money in order to consume, in order to keep the economy going, and so on. Okay, concluding remarks, just a few things. Our focus all along has been on what technology does for us. Our focus has never, ever been on what technology does to us. Okay? And given the power of what Lewis Mumford called gigatechnics, or mega techniques, now it's gigatechniques or nanotechniques in our time, I think it would be fatally foolish to ignore what technology does to us as distinct from what it does for us. The second point in conclusion, Nassim Taleb says beautifully in his book, The Bed of Procrustes, that technology and not cowardice is now the opposite of courage. And I can't do better than to restate that sentence. Third point, there are realities you simply cannot virtualize, like coronaviruses, for instance, like climate catastrophes, like cyclones, and a whole host of such things. And this kind of structural ecological alienation is built into the warp and weft of not only this technology, but every other that precedes it. And we are now up for the time when the bills of history are coming in thick and fast, and we have to watch out. Fourth point, not only this, but human experiences and essences like love, compassion, loyalty, joy, freedom, beauty. One can argue this, but none of these can be virtualized, as has been believed and sold for quite a while now. Fifth, in an age when artificial intelligence and automation are rapidly destroying hundreds of millions of livelihoods and jobs around the world, it does not take a prophet to tell that the rank of Luddites will grow in the future, but time alone will tell. I want to quote, since this is a psychology department seminar, webinar, I want to quote a psychologist, my favorite psychologist, certainly from the Western world, Carl Jung. And this is Carl Jung writing a preface to Heinrich Zimmer's book, Philosophies of India, posthumously published 1951. And he's writing about Ramana Maharishi. And this is what Jung says. It's a sort of a longish quotation. Annie, please bear with me for 2 more minutes and then I'll shut up. The Eastern peoples are threatened with a rapid collapse of their spiritual values. And what replaces them cannot always be counted among the best that Western civilization has produced. From this point of view, one could regard Ramakrishna and Sri Ramana as modern prophets who play the same compensatory role in relation to their people as that of the Old Testament prophets in relation to the unfaithful children of Israel. Not only do they exhort their compatriots to remember their 1,000-year-old spiritual culture, they actually embody it and thus serve as an impressive warning, lest the demands of the soul be forgotten amid the novelties of Western civilization with its materialist technology and commercial acquisitiveness. The breathless drive for power and aggrandizement in the political, social, and intellectual sphere, gnawing at the soul of the Westerner with apparently insatiable greed, is spreading irresistibly in the East and threatens to have incalculable consequences. The externalization of life turns to incurable suffering because no one can understand why he should suffer from himself. No one wonders at this insatiability, but regards it as his lawful right, never thinking that the one-sidedness of this psychic diet leads in the end to the gravest disturbances of equilibrium. That is the sickness of Western man, and he will not rest until he has infected the whole world with his own greedy restlessness, unquote. So if Jung is right, then one day we'll all have to download our lives from the internet. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, sir. Presented to us such a wide canvas by laying down arguments from multiple perspectives that have surely helped us to understand our relationship with screen. Now we have a couple of questions. Some of them had been received on the Google form, and they connect very well with the concept of loss of self that you have discussed. And so one of the questions is that how the loss of self is impacting couple intimacy. Gathering from the whole thing about Japan having paid huggers, that you can pay someone to hug you. Okay, the question goes something like this, that increasingly individuals are reporting feeling cheated by their partner's use of screens, almost as if there is a third person in their relationship. Can you comment on how the screen has or is penetrating some of the most intimate spaces of human life?
Do I really have to answer that? I think the questioner has already answered the question.
But if you could share your perspective a little more on this.
Okay, let's pose a counterfactual. Let's assume for the sake of dream that we were living in a world of perfect, beautiful relationships, harmony everywhere, creative tensions occasionally, but creative ones, not destructive ones. Who would go to the mall? Would anyone go to the mall? Why would you buy anything? Do you have any patience looking at commercials? So none of these things that we've got so used to as sort of reigning perversities of our present normal, none of these things have a raison d'etre. Unless we are depressed, unhappy, miserable, restless, need antidepressants, need distractions, need disruptions. I mean, look at our times. I mean, disruption has been made into a positive fetish. Disruption is a wonderful thing. It's part of progress. Get used to it. Grow up, right? Grow up means what? Grow up means slave and consume, or fight and win. That's basically what growing up is about being basic. Becoming more like Virat, basically. So, in this sort of a world, you know, relationships are not meant to work. You know? And, you know, if you actually are able to generate natural harmony, or discover rather natural harmony in a relationship, you're a threat to the marketplace. You know, that's as much as I'll say. There's a lot more to say, of course, but I'll keep quiet.
Connected question to this, which has been raised by someone, is the issue of addiction. So for most students of psychology and for psychologists, we have these two criteria for defining addiction. One of them being withdrawal symptoms, that you have physiological reactions when you stay away from the source or the substance, and tolerance, that you need increased dosage to have the same level of intoxication.
Right.
Now, in relation to screen use, how do you see this nature of addiction?
That's a very good question. But I'm sure there are people more qualified than me to answer it in the audience. Let's look at any product, any good, well-marketed product. Its dominant feature is that it gives you a mode of escape. And its second dominant feature is that the more you have it, the more you want it. That is to say, it's addictive. Coca-Cola, Lay's chips, iPhones, Formula One cars. You know, think of a range of products. All these products have these two features. They give you a mode of escape, they give you temporary relief, and then they have this lovely property of what economists call diminishing returns, which is to say, the more you consume them, the less does each extra unit give you satisfaction. So therefore, the more you must have in order to achieve the same level of satisfaction as before. Ideally, you want to move to a new product, right? And that's the real charm of the way marketing happens. So it happens across product lines, not just within product lines, right? All this is very deeply thought out. All this is very deeply programmed into us, right? Every time as a teacher I enter an Ashoka classroom, I must remind myself that I'm going to speak to people who have been through 500,000 commercials already in their lives. That is to say, I have to climb over this Great Wall of China, this Great Wall of global media, the Murdochs and the Turners and all those guys who control the thick walls of the world's media, in order to be able to reach them. Because cognitively, and you will know this better than me as psychologists, cognitively they're already so well formed. By the time you are 10, 15, 20, I mean, so much of your basic hardwiring has happened. And that hardwiring has happened at the counters of marketing divisions of transnational corporations. Gone are the days that parents and elders and teachers brought up children. Okay? Young people are now raised by the marketing divisions of corporations. So therefore, it's very important to pay due respect to the cognitive enemy, so to speak. I don't know of a single education system in the world which actually pays it that respect. Which is to say, how many education systems do you know, how many schools or colleges do you know, where people are shown advertising, commercials on a regular basis in order to instruct them into what is going on in the programming that they have gone through, in the propaganda they've already suffered, internalized, inadvertently using them as ways of perceiving the world. if those things didn't work, as I said, these corporations are not fools to be spending billions on them. Every seventh or eighth dollar in America is spent on marketing. That's huge. Why would they waste so much money unless it was effective? So the so-called dumbing down happens across the board. It happens with some of the most intelligent people I know. Adam Curtis's film, The Century of the Self, is a great review of this and shows you exactly how public relations has been working over the last 100 years to create a very wide range of products to actually build stereotypes, including gender stereotypes, including feminist stereotypes, to encourage women to smoke or drink or whatever it is that they want women to do in the name of freedom. So behind all escape activities, all escape products, all addictive products, there is a huge amount of psychology and forethought that has gone into it. And I mean, the anthropology of that is not done in most social science areas, departments that I know.
Since you touched upon the point of education systems, some of the parents have asked the question that how do I strike a balance between the optimal amount of online learning for my child and how do I know that its use is excessive for him or her?
Well, you already know its use is excessive for him or her. You see, you look at children, I mean, I've looked at nieces and nephews at the age of 5 or 7. From parents, they're hearing that they should be on the internet much less. They should not be on the internet, etc. From schools, especially in Corona times, they're hearing that you must be on the internet. Now, this is what Gregory Bateson used to call a double bind, right? When you're still sorting out your mind and your mind is not fully formed and you're being placed in this sort of a double bind, you grow up either confused or schizophrenic, or more likely nowadays, you simply think nothing of your parents, what do they know, You have a certain arrogance towards their ignorance of these technologies and how smartly you can outwit them. I mean, they apply some parental controls, you hack, you find your way around it. Koi patli gali dhoond lo aap digital pe, utna mushkil kaam thodi hai. So all this has created a world, I mean, by design, the digital marketers have created a world in which children are inevitably smarter than their parents. And smarter here does not mean more intelligent. Smarter here merely means being able to navigate the net more effectively, more successfully. That's all. It's to know the buttons and the switches. It doesn't take a whole lot of smartness. It takes something else. Or rather, it doesn't take a whole lot of intelligence. It takes something else. Smart was till the 1970s a term used for clothing. When you dressed well, you were supposed to be smart. Now that term has become natty or something like that, right? But that term from fashion has become part of intellectual fashion, and with considerable devaluation of the intellect to accompany. I don't know what advice to give parents. I mean, go and bomb Mountain View or something like that. Don't plant a bomb in Redmond, in Seattle. Nothing less will do. Or support the coronavirus. I don't know. I mean, you have to think a bit crazy if you think you can defeat these corporations, these digital corporations. I think the time will come when nature will set the bottom line. It already is here, actually. The coronavirus being one example. But a time will come when even this digital gravity thing that we are seeing right now in Corona times will not be workable. The energy sources that you need to run vast arrays of machines like this around the planet, those energy systems will not be working. The energy will not be there.
The next question has to do with the relationship between self and society, and I'm reading out the question. In India, since the demonetization as well as the so-called cheap data revolution, there is an overt dismantling of the foundational norms of concrete materiality that gave meaning to our collective and individual selves. Therefore, over and above the physical death that we talk so much about nowadays, do we need to start talking about our own demise insofar as our older notions of the self are concerned?
Yeah, well, there's something like digital death, I suppose. I mean, I hope we do not confuse it with any deeper notion of psychological death and leave it. See, digital would be harmless if it was mere play. It's completely harmless, I think, if it's seen as playful theater. You know, the moment it's taken seriously, there's a problem. You know? Toys should be toys. You know, it's a very good toy. I agree. It takes a lot of smartness to create a toy like this. It's Lego for young men, shall we say? Um, you know, but then you take it more seriously than that, and you apply it to everything from business.com to shadi.com to God knows what.com, and you're in trouble. And there is what Alfred North Whitehead, the philosopher, used to call fallacy of misplaced concreteness, right? That's very important. I mean, that fallacy is what destroys us, you know. And remember, as creatures of symbolic representation, we can't do without symbols. Symbols are precious to humanity, okay? Illusions are necessary to humanity. Without illusions, there is no humanity. But to know illusion as illusion and truth as truth, that's something else, you know. My main complaint about digital is that it's constantly mixing up these two things, constantly doing this. It's constantly playing with us. Rather than we playing with the technology plays with us. Rather than we gaming the technology games us. And the power structures of the world are strengthened as a result. Now, I mean, one of the ways in which you understand the perils of this technology is the following. Of everything that human beings experience, we feel only a part. Of everything we feel, we can think only a part. Of everything that we think, we can speak only a part. And of everything that we can speak, we can write only a part. And now look at this, what this technology does. It completely collapses all of this into two dimensions and says what you write, what you speak, what you think, what you feel, what you live are all the same. And they're all reducible to words. This is obvious nonsense. This is not disguised nonsense. This is obvious nonsense. But everybody from Steve Jobs and Eric Schmidt to Narendra Bhai Modi and everybody believes this. Right? Now, when are we going to wake up to our intelligence and say, we don't accept this? Okay, let's treat a toy as a toy and let's keep it in proportion. You know, if it gets out of hand, it causes havoc, as you're seeing now. So you can delete a picture of a forest, but if with that deletion of the picture, you also delete a rainforest in real world, does that matter or not? You know? But this is what we are doing. I mean, when doctors, my brother went through heart surgery last week. When doctors are operating on patients, okay, they must trust the image to be reflecting the reality. The angiography is supposed to show you what the condition of the heart actually is, right? And if they make a mistake in that interpretation, the patient's real body will suffer, right? And so the doctor has to be extremely respectful of that image and translate it exactly in terms of what it means in reality. Otherwise, there's a fatality, right? But we are doing that kind of thing everywhere with cavalier ease, you know. And if you have enough billions in your back pocket, you at a few clicks of the mouse, you can remove rainforests, you can melt the ice caps, you can move the equator. God knows what all you can do to this planet. And you think that the earth is so bloody stupid that it won't do anything to you in return? I mean, what did you take these viruses for? Why are we so upset when these viruses travel all the way from North Pole via Wuhan to Delhi and New York? I mean, just like when you build your power plants in Chhattisgarh and you do your coal mining in Chhattisgarh and you displace the tribals from there and they come looking for jobs in Delhi, these viruses are there in these remote ecosystems and under the North Pole or on the seabed. In order to run our mobile phones, we need those rare earths from the bottom of the sea. And then those viruses come looking for alternative locations to reside in. Why do we complain? And how do you presume you're going to win this war? You know, I mean, you're not going to win this war by carrying a nationalist rifle to the coronavirus. You know, so there's a whole host of such stupidities that this technology has encouraged us to sort of partake of. And I'm afraid we have to recalibrate our imagination to sort of get out of this pit, because I do see it as a digital pit.
Thank you, sir. A student of ours wants to know your view on artificial intelligence.
I don't know much about it. I mean, I don't know anything about it. I'm not a computer scientist or an AI person. I sometimes think, I don't know who knows about it. We are getting to that point where machines know things which humans do not. And machine learning is a reality, is a dreadful reality. And we might be on the way to creating things or beings who might have power over us in ways which may not suit our needs or tastes and so on. My questions are rather basic and primitive, and let me state them. Why do we want artificial intelligence? I think natural intelligence is a wonderful thing, provided you discover it and are able to do something with it. If you are ignorant of it, then wake up, you know. And I think that there's no replacement for it. You cannot live on borrowed intelligence. I mean, why I said screens are us is because if you externalize the self and put it over there, what's going to happen to you? Tera kya hoga Galia? So, you know, does it matter or does it not that you remain yourself? You have yourself in your own hands, that you're self-possessed, you know, rather than possessed by technology. You know, people ask for solutions nowadays. One of my solutions is try keeping a sabbatical one day of the week, you know, 12 hours to begin with, 24 hours if you can achieve that, 36 hours, 72 hours. See if you can stay away from this technology. It's not that hard. I've done it. It's not that hard at all. It's just a matter of deconditioning the mind and disciplining yourself. It's a bit like becoming vegetarian. You know, it's not so hard. That also I've done. It's relatively easy. So artificial intelligence is a wonderful thing for the robots and for those who have enough money to buy their share of robots. But for the rest of us, I'm not so sure at all. And if my teaching job at Ashoka or somewhere else is going to be taken over by robots, and I'm going to be told this is in the name of progress, I'm going to break the hell out of that robot. You know, I'm going to become a Luddite, you know. And I think other people should think of that possibility as well. It's better to be violent towards machines than towards yourself or others. You know?
A question which is related to the concept of Samaj that you raised. I think it's a very interesting question. It says, so it reads like this. Since the lockdown, I have begun feeling very comfortable with being alone and having zero or minimal conversation with others, with other people. I wonder if it is healthy. Should I crave human company? Isn't craving unhealthy too?
Well, my answer to you would be, if you really feel you've become comfortable living alone, switch off digital for a week. Then I will believe you. Before that, I will simply not believe you. After you've switched it off for a week, we can have a conversation about this.
All right, so this will be the last question, sir. And this is on a more personal front, which is that how do you as an individual and professional navigate life while minimizing use of technology? And this is specifically for us teachers because at one level, you're not using the smartphone, but we're all teaching through this mode. And so how do you navigate these concerns that we have now?
Well, I have a roster of digital hygiene, as I like to call it, and I try to stick to it. I sometimes stray, I have to confess. But most of the time, I try to keep to it. So, like, I don't use a smartphone. That's quite basic, I think. 9 days out of 10, I shut down all my windows at night. I don't keep windows open at night. And the reason is very simple. I might die in my sleep. And if I am to die in my sleep, I shouldn't leave windows open on the computer. I should close all accounts. Every time I put my head to the pillow at night, I prepare to die. Just like every morning when I wake up in the morning, it's a new life, not just a new day. So birth and death to me since childhood have chimed with, waking up in the morning and going to bed at night. I find that psychologically healthy. And so I shut down all my windows. I try not to have more than 10 windows open at a time, although I sometimes stray on that during research. And I flirt with a lot of stuff on the net, which I shouldn't. I'm a bad boy sometimes. But what else? I mean, I have to track about 5 email accounts every day. Unfortunately, that's the cost of not having a smartphone. Because I'm not on WhatsApp, and so people send me all sorts of stuff. And I have about 4,000 or 5,000 students I've taught over 35 years. Hundreds of them are in touch with me, so it's a bit of a, many hours of my week go in answering mails from students. So you have to have your priorities, and you must know your priorities before you turn on the computer in the morning. That's very important. It's like when I first went to America and I entered a supermarket all dazed as to what am I supposed to buy here. And it took me a week to figure out that I must know in advance and I must make a mental list. These are the 5 things I want. These are the aisles in which I must find them and ignore all else. All else is noise, ignore the noise in life. So like that with the internet, because the internet is a vast ocean and it's easy to drown in it.
I think we have time for one more question. A participant has just reminded me that I have missed her question. Her question is this: does technology reflect cynical or linear thinking? And is all technology totalitarian?
Well, the last answer is mostly yes, actually. Believe it or not. There's a difference between techne and technology. So the word technology is made up of 2 Greek words, techne plus logos. Logos is abstract, symbolic, logic, wordy logic, okay? And techne is arts and crafts required for the purpose of living. All cultures have had techne. All cultures have not had technology. In fact, most cultures have not had technology. The way the trajectory of modern technology has gone and how much conquest and colonialism, murder, mayhem, slavery, genocide underlies it, I tend to believe, if there was time, I would take 2 hours to convince you of the same. Modern technology is totalitarian. It can't not be. Because it's reductionist. It's based on Cartesian principles, which are themselves reductionist. It's very hard to see how technology will liberate humanity. Aldous Huxley wrote Brave New World, Orwell wrote 1984, Hannah Arendt wrote Origins of Totalitarianism, Evgeny Zamyatin wrote We. All these books were written to warn us exactly of what we're living now. We didn't heed the warnings, so that's the problem. It could be very, very different if you understand the difference between techne and technology. And I think that Gandhi and Rabindranath, for instance, were talking about it. But that's a very different world, very different imagination. We badly need that imagination now. Because the age of technology, as I see it, is coming to an end. We will be forced to think completely afresh the grounding principles of modernity as we have inherited it. So it's time to move on from here. It's a long discussion, but I'll stop here.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Reshma?
Yes, thank you. With much gratitude, I, Reshma Jose, Assistant Professor, Department of Psychology, take up this opportunity to propose the vote of thanks on behalf of my department. To begin with, I would like to thank our speaker, Professor Aseem Shrivastava, for taking out some time to be with us and sharing his thoughts on exploring the changing dynamics of the individual and the collective with the screen in the COVID-19 era. As said by Professor Shrivastava, if individual and collective memory can be woken up from the slumber of virtual and imagination guided towards the real, a community may re-emerge in human experience as the tableau of shared enterprises which binds people to a common destiny. It will arise in consciousness as a fraternity of hearts which has room for the true sharing of joys and sorrows. Our sincere gratitude to our principal, Sister Dr. Rose Lee, for motivating and providing us with the opportunity to organize this special webinar and bringing us together on a common platform. I thank our IQAC convener, Dr. Alka Marva, the webinar committee convener, Dr. Amita Motwani, and her team for their valuable support, inputs, and technical realities. Without you, our participants, organizing this would have been futile. Thanking all of you who have joined us today in this relationship with the screen and for enhancing the interactive nature of what we had in mind while formulating the theme itself, your relationship with the screen today. One of our students, Miral Imam, needs a special mention here. The poster for the day was prepared by her to communicate to all of you the complete picture of the meaning behind the theme. I would like to take this opportunity to thank our teacher in charge, Dr. Joan Anthony, for providing us her guidance and making sure that the webinar, from its conception till its final outcome, is a collaborative venture of the department members. With Ms. Annie Baxi as the moderator for the session, and the rest of us, Dr. Vinita Shetripal, Dr. Shafali Mishra, Dr. Sneh Kapoor, Dr. Priya Bhatnagar, Ms. Bhumika Kapoor, Ms. Sumangli Radhakrishnan, Ms. Isha Mishra, Ms. Sudha Shashwati, Ms. Radhika Raturi, Ms. Aishwarya Bajaj, and myself, working together as one unit to bring this theme of present-day relevance before you. Closing and wishing each one of our participants and your families protection and health in the days to come. Godspeed for now till we meet again. Thank you.